Sgt Bill Magrath joined 82 Squadron at Watton as a replacement crew member posted in to replace those lost on the disastrous raid to Gembloux, Belgium, of the 17th of May 1940, when 82 Squadron lost 11 of the 12 aircraft dispatched. According to the squadron's operations record book, Bill's first op with 82 was on the 29th of July 1940. Unfortunately, we don't have his logbook to confirm his arrival date at Watton, which Bill suggests in this film was late April 1940. Bill was filmed and interviewed by videographer Nell Horn at the 1990 Wartime Watton Reunion, and he recalls the day of raid and subsequent outcome for him. As a result of his bravery, Bill was awarded the Military Medal, a rare honour for a member of the RAF.
I served on 82 Squadron from the end of April until August the 13th, 1940. On that date, the squadron took off on that Tuesday the 13th of August, a lovely sunny morning, and flew to Aalborg, which is on the northeastern corner of Jutland in Denmark, to bomb the airfield there. We had, I think probably a lot of people have been telling you about this, but we flew into a hornet's nest of Messerschmitt 109s, and the 11 aircraft that were bombing the target were all shot down. Of the 33 airmen that were in those aircraft, 13 were alive and 20 were dead. And I was one of the lucky ones, obviously talking now, that lived on.
Well, can you describe what happened when you the planes actually hit?
Well, yes, we had only just, there had been a lot of fire from the ack guns, and we were just coming up on the target and managed to get our bombs away when we were attacked by fighters, and one of our engines went on fire, and we fell out of the formation at that stage, and we actually started to head first of all towards Sweden, and the idea that maybe it would be a good idea to, we knew we hadn't enough fuel or anything to get home, but that might be an idea. However, the fighters just kept coming on, and of course we found ourselves with no engines and very much on fire, and our pilot, with the sort of last bit of control he had of the aircraft, managed to pull it up so that it landed on the water near the island of Eggholm, without actually smashing to pieces. What we didn't know was that although the water lay nice and smooth and placid there, it was very shallow, and just under the surface there were some rocks. So the aeroplane in fact was smashed to pieces, and we were very, very lucky to survive.
How did you get out of the water then?
Well, we were lying there, I don't know for how long. I certainly drifted in and out of consciousness quite a bit, and then eventually some people waded out from the island and pulled us ashore. They sort of kept us there on the shoreline until a little boat came along and took us to the Aalborg, the town itself, to one of the jetties at Aalborg, and from there to hospital. The one thing that made me think I was likely to live was that I was put down on the bottom of this little boat, and I could see, sitting on one of the seats not very far from me, was a very good-looking girl, and I could see rather a lot of her legs. And I was still interested enough in that, and I thought, Magrath, you're going to live.
Did you have good treatment in hospital?
Yes, I suppose within the limits of, certainly in the Danish hospital, we were very well treated. In fact, as far as the Germans were concerned, we were getting too good treatment. And as a net result, within 3 days or so, they put us into a little ambulance and took us out of Denmark to Schleswig-Holstein in Germany, to a prisoner of war hospital, where I was, for about 6 weeks, the only British prisoner in a hospital with Poles, Belgium, French, Moroccan, you name it, they were there. And certainly there they looked after us quite well, but we were on straw mattresses and on the very poor type of feeding that they did and so on. It was a distinct, mind you, initially I was very, very ill, and therefore I wasn't worried about the feeding very much. But eventually, I did get interested and found just how poor and monotonous it was.
Can I ask you something quite intimate in a way? When you said that when you first thought, well, possibly you weren't going to die, you must have thought that you were going to die at some time.
Yes.
Did you feel as though you were accepting it? I know you couldn't do anything else if you were to die, but did you fight against it, do you think? Or did you accept it?
Well, that's an interesting question. It happened in two ways. First of all, I think everybody was living at a very high degree of nervous tension at that time. I know I certainly was. And as a net result, I used to know, back here in Watton, I could look at a chap going out on a raid and I'd say, I could say to myself, he's not coming back. And the initial raids I did and so on, I didn't have that feeling at all. But when I left the Norfolk coast that morning, I knew I wasn't coming back, quite literally. And at that time, I didn't know anything. I never even dreamt of being a prisoner of war. So I assumed I was going to be killed. And you just accepted it. Now, the interesting thing was that when I was in hospital, there was a time, obviously, of crisis. I was in a good deal of pain, and I knew that I could die if I wanted to, and that was the easy way out. That seems maybe a funny thing to say,
no, I can quite understand.
but if I gave in, acceptance was the easy way, and I fought at that stage. So there's two sort of different situations, and you tackle them in different ways. But I knew, in my inner being, that if I wanted to quit, I could.
But you thought life was more difficult.
Oh yes.
And then how long were you a prisoner for?
Well, I spent 6 months in that particular hospital, and then another 3 months in a hospital in Poland, and then went up to Stalag 1, last in Pomerania, which was the first RAF prisoner of war camp, which was a lovely place. By lovely, I mean the morale of the people and so on there was fantastic.
Is that the one somebody said you were going to make Buckland's holiday camp out of it?
That's the sort of place, yes. Yes. It had when I was there, of course, it was early on in the war, and the net result was that, of course, all the people there, it wasn't overcrowded or anything, and so we had a fair amount of space to work in and so on. But there were people tunnelling, there were people doing this, that, and the others. Even somebody trying to get an amateur theatrical group together, and people studying for exams. It was a live place,
Initiative.
Full of initiative, full of interesting sort of little acts of courage. I can remember one where there was a small fellow about 5'2", a strutting little officer they got there, German, and he came sailing into the camp one day, being, bossing and pushing and bullying, and he wasn't getting the right response from the troops, so he took out his revolver, and as quick, about 40 people went round him like that, and they said, "How many bullets have you got in that? Because if you want to shoot, shoot now, because when you're finished, we're going to kill you." And it was, when you think about it. So they said you can either start shooting or you can give us the gun. Gave them the gun, and they marched him out to the gates and handed him over to the sentry on the gate, and handed over his gun, of course, as well. We never saw him again.
What happened?
But that's the sort of spirit there was in that camp,
Did you have do you think, or maybe you may know, did you have Germans who infiltrated and pretended to be other nationals?
That, I think, came later in the war. But remember, I managed to escape in November 1941.
Yes, how did you manage that?
Well, once again, I was one of those selected for repatriation because of my wounds. And we were moved from Germany down to Rouen in France. And we were put into a prison camp there they had on the old Rouen racecourse, which they divided up into quarters. One segment they put us in, one segment they had the Germans their own quarters in, and another segment they had the officers in, this type of thing. You see, and one was actually disused. But guarding us was very lax because we were going home. Why should we try to run away? And naturally, nobody did run away. There seemed no sense in it. But then about 2 weeks went by, and suddenly a mass of new Germans arrived, and suddenly the guarding of this place became very much more efficient. And we thought, my God, something's gone wrong. So a fellow called Ollie James, and a fellow called Patterson, and a fellow called Matheson and myself decided that we weren't going to be repatriated and we better start doing something about it. And our strategy was to, instead of trying to go through the wire in our own camp, which was very well guarded, we assumed that if we could break into the German camp, they were unlikely to be guarding their own portion of the wire as diligently as they were ours. And we actually broke into their camp just beside their guard room on a wet, filthy November night. And we were right. We had no trouble at all. It was a bit sort of frightening at first, you know, because every time you cut the wire, it pinged a bit, you know, and there was Germans within yards of us, you know. But we got out, and Patterson and Matheson had a different idea what to do when they got out. They believed they were so near England at Rouen that the sensible thing to do was to go in and see if they could find a boat or find somebody to do something for them. The idea of going away from that area seemed ridiculous to them, so they went on their way and were caught again. But Ollie James and I worked on the principle that that would be, any part of that coast would be very, very heavily guarded, and it would be a silly thing to try. And we decided to head for Gibraltar. It was a lot further away, but it seemed a sensible thing to do. And after sort of 2 to 3 months of travel, that's where we ended up.
And what happened during the travel? Did you get taken in by friendly people at all?
We got help from, yes. We started off by walking a good deal. We thought the best thing to do, because we didn't know the Americans were in the war at this stage, you see. So we thought, well, we'll go to Paris and see if we can get to the American embassy. They'll probably be able to help us. And we thought we'd walk along the banks of the Seine, which we knew very well ended up in Paris, or at least went through it. But it was hard going, and we're living off the land, potatoes or turnips in the field, that sort of thing, you know. And it was pretty grim in that time of year, as you can imagine.
Did you ever get any rabbits or anything like that?
Oh, no, we didn't catch anything like that. But after about a week of this, we thought, this isn't really working. We're going to need somebody, a bit more help if we're going to really make it. And we went into a village, and we thought the sort of welfare officer of the average village will be the parish priest. So we lay low until we saw this chap, and we went up and we put our cards on the table, and we said, we're 2 British prisoners of war on the run, can you help us? And he took us to his house, and he's a lovely motherly housekeeper who said, what you two need is a box. And we had a lovely hot bath, we had a lovely hot bath there, and she had made us a nice hot meal, the first one we'd had in a while, I can tell you. And in the meantime, the priest had been round the village and managed to get together some civilian clothes for us. And we got a bit of French money, and he helped us with a bit more money from his parishioners, I assume, and taught us how to ask for a ticket to Paris. There was a little station just down the road, and we were put through the drill. He was the ticket man, you know, and we went through the drill, and so we learned this off by heart, and we trotted down there, bought a ticket to Paris, and lo and behold, we were there, you see, no trouble at all. In about 2.5 hours we were in Paris. And I think the thing you've got to remember about places, everybody sort of thinks, my God, 2 Englishmen there, they'll stick out like a sore thumb. But in fact, there was an awful lot of foreigners in Paris, as there were in most big cities, so that so long as you blended into the scene reasonably well. That's right. So, and we both knew schoolboy French and that type of thing, so we went and we bought a guide, and we went on the metro and got ourselves to the American embassy, of course, to find that there was a war on and the thing was closed and so on. We then went to the Anglican church in the hope maybe there'd be something there, and there wasn't. And we tried 2 or 3 places fairly desperately, and then it was getting on to evening, and we knew there was a curfew on the streets of Paris, and we had to get off them. And we really got a bit worried, put it mildly. We thought, well, we really got to find a home. And we did something which, in fact, was very reckless, but by this stage we were getting desperate. We went up to this lady of the streets and said, look here, we're on the run. Could you shelter us? That was a hell of a risk to take, but she turned out trumps. She took us home to a little flat she had. In fact, it seemed to be a flat with an awful lot of the same sort of thing going on all around it, you know. But she gave us some ersatz coffee, a slice of bread, and that sort of thing. And I'm afraid we weren't in the passionate mood at that stage. We hadn't got very much reserves of strength. So we slept on the floor of her room that night. And then I forgot to tell you, all credit to this good lady, she took us out to the cinema. And we sat with her in this cinema watching a German war film about how well they were doing with Germans all around us. It gave you a very funny feeling, as you can imagine. And anyway, the next morning she gave us another cup of coffee and said, now that's it, you know, you've got to go. So we wandered off again, looking at anything we could do, anything which we thought might help us. We went to 1 or 2 churches, but they were frightened. They wouldn't give us away, but they certainly weren't going to help us. So we were walking, we were sort of near the A12, and we went up a side street, and in this side street there was a sort of big warehouse type place with a placard on it which showed Red Cross, barbed wire, and a pathetic looking prisoner of war hanging in the barbed wire, and it said, all help for prisoners of war. It was actually the French Red Cross, and really they were doing that sort of thing. So we thought, this is it. And we marched into this place, and there was a sort of little vestibule with an inquiry desk behind it, and a little old lady sitting there knitting, you see. So she looked up, and we said, we see you help prisoners of war, will you help 2 British ones? And she was a very calm lady. She looked at us, put the knitting down, and just did like that, and took us in and threw open the door, and inside there was a big hall with trestle tables, and there were women knitting and, you know, all that sort of thing, and packing parcels and all that sort of jazz going on. She sort of said, look what I found, you see, sort of thing, you know. And we were surrounded by a load of excited ladies, which we were terrified because the Gestapo headquarters, it wasn't much more than about 200 yards away from that particular area. So when we got out, got a bit of calm, we said, please, can you find someone who can help us, you know, and so on. And they eventually, one of them went off, found obviously knew someone, and a man came along, and he asked a few short, sharp questions, and he was nothing like as welcoming. But eventually, we obviously satisfied him enough. And he said, you follow me about 20 yards behind, and I shall go through a tower and up some stairs, and you do that too. And I'm not going on too long. Anyway, up the stairs we went, and into this door. As soon as we were in, the door was locked, and we were there, you see, and I thought, oh dear, end of escape, you know, the next thing we're going to have is the Germans here again. But not so. In about 5 minutes, up arrived a monk, and he looked at the 2 of us and said, who are you? And in English. So we told him who we are, and as soon as I spoke, he homed into me. He said, you're Irish? So I said, yes. So he said, where do you come from? So I told him, and he said, where did you go to school? So I told him Enniskillen in County Fermanagh. He said, was there a monastery there? And I said, yes, it's called the Grand, and so on. He said, do you know anybody there? So I said, no. I said, I went to a Pretoria. I said, at school in the hill, I was a Protestant, so we didn't really, as you know, in Northern Ireland, do very much mixing between the 2 communities. So I said, I don't know, I didn't. But he said, oh yes. So we then said, who was the headmaster of Pretoria and all this sort of thing. And we were in. They were then quite satisfied. We weren't a plant from the Gestapo or something. And we had our photographs taken, you know, it got false identity papers. They gave us a ticket and put us on the train out of Paris in due course to a place on the borders between occupied and unoccupied France, to a doctor's house there, where we were looked after for a week or so. And in fact, while I was in Nevers, one of the interesting things that happened, you know, for something to do, and we decorated a shop in the street. Ollie and I, we painted inside and so on and watched everything that went on and so on. Very nice. And eventually they managed to get us across into unoccupied France. And we went down to Marseille. We were to an address we were given there. We were kept there for 2 days. We were then given an address and a railway ticket to Perpignan. And we went there. And we had a bit of a disaster there, in that having got there, we were given an address, and when we got to the address, it was empty. I'm afraid somebody had been there before us, by the look of it. So we thought, what shall we do? You know, we were getting close, but you weren't too sure what the Spanish border was like and how to manage. So anyway, we thought, well, certainly all we can do today is book ourselves in at a hotel, because we now had money and we had identity papers and we could do just that. And we wandered along the street and there was a hotel which said the Hotel Angleterre. So we said ourselves. So in we marched and booked ourselves in. Now we must have looked suspicious to them for some reason or other, I don't know. But of course, remember, unoccupied France, while it was unoccupied, really had a lot of plainclothes Germans, police, Gestapo, and God knows what in it. And I think that, well, in fact, I know from what happened afterwards, that the people in the hotel thought that we were being planted there by the Germans. So we could hear a lot of furtive goings on and people looking at us and that sort of thing. And we thought, there's something wrong here. This isn't right. We better go. So we proceeded to trot out again, and this big fellow came up to us and stopped, blocked our way. He said, "Who are you?" You see. So we thought, well, nothing ventured, nothing won. So I said, we're two RAF flyers on the run, and we need help. Can you do anything for us? And he asked a few questions to make himself happy that that's really what we were. And we were taken in as his guests, in fact. He was the proprietor of the hotel. And we said, any idea how we can get across to Spain? So he said, well, he didn't really know. But there was a lot of smuggling that went on from southern France to Spain that was going on. And he knew one or two smugglers that were in the business. I suppose at the hotel, you see, would pick up black market stuff at one time or another. But he said, they're not patriotic, or not anything like that. This is going to be for money. He said, I don't know if you know it, but he said, any flyer that is handed in here in unoccupied France, the Germans pay 80,000 francs for it. Quite a lot of money. So he said, you're going to have to do a good deal better than that if you want a professional smuggler to take you into Spain. So he got us in touch with this fellow, and we decided the going price better be a bit better than, obviously, 80,000. So we offered £120,000 apiece, 120,000 francs apiece, to be collected at the consulate in Barcelona. And in due course, after a most diabolical crossing of the Pyrenees, because all we had on, was a shirt, a jacket, a pair of trousers, and socks and shoes, and we were crossing the Pyrenees in January.
He led you over there?
He led us over. And he actually delivered us to the consulate in Barcelona, where the consul was, well, we were only the third and fourth people that had ever got across at that stage. And he was very enthusiastic and thought we were a very splendid pair of fellows, until we explained to him that little Spaniard down in the hall needed 240,000 francs. And he was a bit shattered. However, he did pay up, and indeed that was the going price from then on in. So we set the going price. And we stayed there for a little while, and then went to Madrid, to the embassy in Madrid, and from there down to Gibraltar, and from Gibraltar home. All right?
And you were glad?
Oh, we were glad. I think the most interesting sequel of this, when we got home, we were taken for interrogation into MI6 or MI5 or one of these sort of places, and they grilled us for about 4 or 5 days. And having grilled us, they then said, what do you want to do? You see, you're all right now, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go home, of course, you see. So they gave me a warrant to my home in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and I got on the train to Stranraer and got home, went to our house, nothing in it, no one there. So I knocked to my neighbours, and they said, You know, the excitement was intense, as you can imagine. And they said, your mother works up at the, she's now working on censorship. They said, well, never mind, we'll get in touch with her. And they let me in, you see, and so on. And I was home 3 days when a telegram arrived from the Air Ministry to say to my mother, your son is now in the United Kingdom.
I beat them to it.
That's right.
Talk about luck of the Irish and intuition of the Irish. You did pretty well, didn't you?
We were very, very lucky.
Yes, but you must have had an awful lot of strength as well. It's a marvellous story.
Thank you.
Bill's escape and return home earned him a military medal. Medically unfit to fly, he remained in the RAF as an air traffic controller and left the RAF as a squadron leader in 1947. He then worked for the Ministry of Aviation in Ireland for some time before moving to Boscombe Down in 1967, remaining there until he retired in 1980. Bill was active in local politics and served as Mayor of Salisbury in 1986 to 1987 and remained on the council until 1995. In 2003, Bill sold his military medal and other medals, raising £1,200 for Salisbury District Hospital, who had saved the life of his wife. An exceptionally brave and selfless man who was a delight to know. Bill died on the 14th of October 2011, aged 91. Voiceover by Paul Young.